Hello, I'm Meredith Blackwell, and I am here at the Mycological Society of America meeting in Minnesota, and this is the year 2019. And we're going to have interviews which are part of the project, the Oral History for Mycology. And my colleague Don Pfister is helping with this. Don? And we're going to interview.
I'm Chris Shardl, University of Kentucky.
And Chris has worked for many years with endophytes, and the endophytes that occur in grasses and sedges. So we're going to start out with your question, Don.
Well, the way we've started these out is to have you talk a little bit about your early life, where you grew up and how you began working academically in mycology.
Yeah, did your family encourage you, or had they been to college and thought it was a good thing, or what?
Yes, indeed. Well, my father probably much less so, because his training was as a opera conductor. But my mother was trained microbiologist and trained got a master's degree in environmental science, and we've moved all over the place. There was a bit of family property, still is, in the wilderness, the Catskills of New York, and spent a lot of time there. And
were you born in New York State?
I was not. I was born in Oxford, England.
Oh,
yes.
Oh, one of those.
Yes. It only took them 27 days to kick me out of the country, though.
Oh, and they accepted you here.
Somehow, well, but back then the communications were not what they are now. But actually, I majored in biochemistry in college and in graduate school. In graduate school, I worked on Agrobacterium tumefaciens.
And where were you when you were doing those?
All right, so college was Cornell University, and on graduate school, University of California in Davis.
Okay.
I worked with Calcato on Agrobacterium, metabolic studies. Went to the Plant Breeding Institute, at the time was in Cambridge, England, and worked on plant mitochondrial genetics. And when I started to interview for jobs, and I don't remember why, but I had in the back of my mind that I'd never worked on fungi before, and I thought it would be pretty cool to work on fungi. And some of the places I interviewed thought, oh, if you've never worked on it,
Good idea. Huh?
Yeah, but the crazy folks in Kentucky thought, oh yeah, that's fine, we'll help out. And of course, there were some collaborators there, including someone who had recently started up work on seed-transmitted endophytes in grasses, for actually very practical agricultural reasons. And so that really captivated my interests. And,
well, you're lucky to have a job at Kentucky. I applied much earlier than you did, and they wrote me back, no possibility. And I worked on fungi at the time.
Oh my, I didn't
That was a long time ago. Yeah,
I'm sure it was different folks calling the shots back then.
Yeah. So I wanted to find out why it was endophytes. Why did you?
Why did that interest me?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was kind of the whole package. I feel like I've always been interested in symbiosis as a concept, and in this case, and I was interested in something that also would have a practical application. So here we had an endophyte in the grass. It was benefiting the grass, but causing some toxicity to livestock.
This is the fescue story.
It's the tall fescue story, yes, tall fescue toxicosis.
I've seen pictures of some of the animals that were affected. Fescue foot?
Yes.
Have you seen animals with these diseases?
I have not actually seen fescue foot out, other than slides. I think by the time I was on it, they were careful enough never to let the symptoms get that far.
Yeah.
In fact, I made the mistake of including such slides in a departmental seminar, and plant scientists sometimes don't want to see things like that, and so it actually did get some criticism.
Yeah. So what are exactly the symptoms, the early symptoms? How do you recognize it?
So it's very closely related to St. Anthony's fire, very similar
Mhm.
chemicals involved, and famous medieval wood cutting shows symptoms of that, which is people losing limbs. So that's pretty much the severest symptoms.
Yeah,
is,
and I think in that woodcut, people have like burning flames coming out of
Yeah,
their arms. Do
yeah.
the animals show that symptom?
Well,
or can you tell?
I think you can't necessarily tell because they can't tell you what they're feeling
Mhm.
at the time. It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they lie in water. Is that?
they often do. Yeah, they often do stand in water and not drink. They can't regulate their body temperatures well. They can't regulate their
Mhm.
water content well. And generally, it's also been called summer slump because of that. The dry gangrene of the limbs of the hooves, loss of
Yeah.
hooves, is more of a winter problem. It's a low temperature
Interesting.
problem, and then the weight loss and loss of appetite and reproductive problems and so forth are associated with summer slump.
Was it Kentucky 31?
That's the cultivar.
Can you talk about that a minute?
Right. So there was so it was in the throes of the Dust Bowl era, massive drought throughout the United States, and there was some event about 50 miles east of Lexington, where the university is, and a farmer approached a professor, an agronomy professor there, and said, "I want you to come to my farm and have a look at this grass because it's doing very well, and all my neighbors, their grass is in very bad shape." So this was recognized very quickly as being something that was very drought tolerant, and therefore, and especially when there's concern about hillsides losing their soil and so forth. So it was put into the pipeline to breed cultivars. That's what Kentucky 31 is, one of the first two cultivars of tall fescue, and very much pushed by a Soil Conservation Service. And so a huge amount of pastures were replaced with tall fescue. But the animal scientists, they started from very early on saying, we think there's a problem here, and they certainly were right.
Mhm.
In my university in the early 50s, a couple of them lost their jobs for saying what ultimately we know was
That's right.
correct, that there was a problem with that. And that, so on the one hand, the toxicosis is associated with this endophyte. On the other hand, the robustness of the grass is very much associated with this endophyte.
Yeah.
And so now they've gone into mined natural populations and found strains that are not so toxic and do seem to benefit the grass, at least to some extent, and they've made commercial cultivars with those. But when you're talking about steep hillsides in the Appalachians, going and replacing your pasture is not an easy or economic prospect.
Yeah. So, what specifically is your focus on these? How do you approach this?
I'm one with a notable lack of focus.
All right.
That's good.
I came in with some molecular tools pretty much, and I thought it'd be nice to apply these tools to fungi other than what were the standard models of the time, yeast and Neurospora and Aspergillus. And here was a system that there was next to nothing really known about, and so it's kind of a matter of let's do whatever we can think to do with these things. And my primary aim, for which honestly my dean bribed me to do this, was to actually modify the endophyte to eliminate ergot alkaloids. We knew nothing about the genetics of the endophyte. We knew nothing about the genetics of ergot alkaloid production at the time, but there was a lot about the biochemistry, which was fortunate. We didn't even really know that we could culture this endophyte. I mean, there were many things. And then there's the desperation of an assistant professor working with a slow-growing organism with techniques that you have no idea whether they'll work or not. And then we have PCR technology happening on and people applying it to evolutionary studies, and this, you know, seemed like a really cool evolutionary story too. So that, I think, kind of it probably saved my career because that was something that could be done in a reasonable period of time to get papers out. And though that turned out to be extremely weird.
And how did your dean feel about this?
Oh, he'd retired by the time I really got into it. His successor was very supportive. Yeah, he was very supportive, and in fact, the board of trustees, the chairman of the board of trustees, who owned Pennington Seeds, was very supportive. And at some point along the lines, they made me a Kentucky colonel. So, I'm sorry I'm not wearing all white. I have a little bit of the beard, I guess. But so yeah, in Kentucky, they've been very supportive.
Great.
I think the last time I thought about what you do was there was a widespread news flash about animals dying. Was it, or the foals were born dead or something? It was supposed to be an elaborate thing where things fell into the water, or?
Yeah, and
What was
that was not related.
But what was
but
the
it was a
story?
mystery. It was called mare reproductive loss syndrome, and there were a lot of stillborn foals. It seemed to be associated with an outbreak of tent caterpillars, because tent caterpillars feed on plants that produce cyanogens, so they have to deal with cyanide. There was some sense that maybe the tent caterpillars were getting eaten by horses accidentally, and then
Nothing to do
cyanide
with your
poisoning.
endophytes.
We were asked to look into it, and the indications were that nothing, that there was no relationship between what the horses were eating and
the foals.
Yeah, tall fescue was not the issue.
Okay, so don't lots of grasses have cyanogenic glycosides when they're quite young?
Yes, some of the C4 grasses do. These particular endophytes are restricted to C3 grasses, though there are relatives in the C4 grasses.
So what killed the foals?
So it did turn out to have to do with the tent caterpillars. It had to do with the setae, you know, the little hairs that basically those acted like little hypodermic needles, and in the guts of the horses, and were introducing bacteria. So they were becoming
Interesting.
septic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Who would have guessed? So you've done a lot of work for the Mycological Society. Why don't you tell us about that?
Oh well, you know, it's thrilling to be involved with the Mycological Society. Jimi Hendrix, not playing the guitar behind, but mycorrhizal researcher in my department now, long since retired. He recommended that I join the society, which I did.
Do you remember what year?
I do not remember
Were you
what year.
already at Kentucky?
Yes. I remember the meeting in Ottawa in, I think, 1988, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it was about then. It was the year that we had the big stock market semi-crash. It was
is that
about
right?
then. I think it was that year. Yeah.
And
That's the
I
first
thought
meeting
it was
you remember.
yeah, I thought that was a wonderful meeting. My involvement, I think, was fitful and gradual over the years. I was on council. I think before that I was an associate editor for a while, so forth. You know, it's just such a great bunch of people. It's not huge, which I think makes a difference. Of course, we'd like everybody to work on fungi, but then again, we don't want necessarily a huge society. So I think that makes for a very congenial.
Did your dean like it?
Oh,
that
I think
you were
my
active
I
in
think
the-
my dean didn't even know what a fungus was.
Okay. Okay. So one other thing I was curious about: were you on pins and needles about this time last year, when you were getting ready for the?
Oh, for
The
the
Congress.
for the IMC 11.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. and
Were you watching
if
the
I-
weather reports?
if I had it all to do over again, there are quite a number of things I would have done differently. Just because, in part, because I ended up making a whole lot more work for myself than I needed to. But thank you, Don, especially very much for helping with the program
Yeah.
and the workshops and so forth. That was a great.
It was quite an event.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I think everybody was very brave to go ahead and do it, because you
Yeah.
know there
Well,
was
you
a
know,
lot of problem, and we're talking about San Juan, Puerto Rico right
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
Well, there were discussions about should we do it, should we move venue, and so forth. And there was a point at which I think I probably wrote and said, look, we need to move forward. There are people there suffering. Let's not get too
Yeah.
high on ourselves that we're thinking that we're not going to be able to do this and so forth. And I think it was great that we did it, and it was such a success.
And we
Mhm.
went out shopping. I think Don and I went out shopping. Kathy got Christmas presents from San Juan,
Yeah, well.
and
you
I
know,
gave some to my daughter and niece.
Excellent.
You
yeah.
know,
We helped
helping
the economy. Yeah,
helping the
yeah.
economy with
Felt really
with
good about
doing
spending
it.
money then.
And you know, for me, I was going back. I'd been there a couple times, but my first job was at the University of Puerto Rico in
Oh, is that right?
Mycology. So
Wow.
you know, to go back and to see San Juan and to see some of these spots and to realize what desperate straits people were in,
Yeah.
had been in,
Mm.
and yet to see the resilience that was shown. I think it's great. I'm glad we did it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh, that's marvelous. That was my first visit, and of course I remember the foray at El Yunque
Yeah,
National
well,
Forest.
yeah, I didn't go to
fantastic.
the forays, but I heard that things were, you know, so much was down. You know, it was a very different looking and feeling forest than probably I remembered from.
And
the
I was
olden
very
days.
lucky because we went there for Christmas, the whole family, and Sharon Cantrell and Jose took us up El Yunque. And I remember we were looking for rabbit animals. What kind of animals do they have?
Oh,
They warn
really?
you about some kind of,
Mongoose.
yeah,
The
yeah.
mongoose.
Yeah, they introduced mongooses.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
but it was a wonderful place to have a meeting. It really turned out
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
Mm.
thanks for your work, both of you.
Well, thanks. I think in the best of circumstances, for any meeting organizer, they get to the point of, well, maybe I really shouldn't have done this. It's surprising how much work
Little bit of desperation.
Too late, too
Yes.
late. Anyway,
Yeah, but after a couple of hurricanes and it's just amazing that Sharon and Jean and others there actually pulled
Yeah.
pulled it off
Yeah.
and retained their sanity. But
Yeah.
it was-
so go
Well,
ahead.
no, thinking about your own career,
Mhm.
and we began with, you didn't have focus, you didn't know about fungi, you didn't know where things were going to go. What do you tell your students and young people?
Oh, the thing that springs to mind is this, that they should take opportunities to learn a wide breadth of things, whether or not they think it's going to be useful for their intended careers. I really feel like I meet all too often with this resistance that is based on the, but I need to focus on this because that's my intended career. And to be honest, the resistance is sometimes from the student, sometimes through the student from the advisor,
Mm.
which I think is even
It's
worse.
worse.
So just having a broad interest, being generally curious, and not being overly focused would be my major
Great.
advice to
Yeah.
you.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Anything we've
Thanks.
left out you want to say?
I'm trying to think if I. It's been quite a journey, and yeah, I'm not ready to give it up yet.
Okay, good. How many years have you been at Kentucky?
Oh, let's see, 85. So
Okay.
so not 85 years. I've been there
No,
34
no.
years.
That's a long time.
Good, good
Yeah.
spell.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a great department, and yeah, so I was not feeling compelled to leave. Yeah.
Well,
Great. Well,
thanks very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you
Chris.
very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate
That's
the
great.
opportunity.